This particular cyclical period we're going through now is nowhere near as bad as it was then, but I am reaping the rewards of those lessons that I learned in the way I've structured the business, in that we're much more robust now going through this particular squeeze point in the cycle than we would have been had I not learnt those lessons previously.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 55 of the show. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing? Well, I hope. I'm doing fine. Getting back into the swing of things after a bit of a summer break and looking forward to the year ahead. Got a great guest coming up on the show today. A developer who learned from her dad and has kept the family business going with her brother. I think you will enjoy the chat we have. On the projects front, it has been quieter than usual with the summer break, as many people in the property industry take a holiday and things take a while to ramp back up again. But I've launched a small marketing campaign for the project that I got a permit for a few months back. It's a bit of a canary down the mine, where I can test the state of the market and see what kind of feedback we get. In a stroke of good fortune, our campaign got a bit of media exposure from realestate.com and news.com.au due to our focus on using emotional marketing to connect with potential buyers. So it was interesting to get noticed. In the meantime, I'm working on getting the pre-sale campaign material sorted out, so things like the sale contracts, printed collateral and internal renders, and the architects are getting the working drawings underway and engaging consultants. So a busy period in the project. I also produced a short walkthrough video of the site explaining how the scheme is going to look. So check that out if you're interested in seeing how the project is going to work out. I will post a link to the video on the show notes for this episode, or you can see it on the show's Facebook and Insta feeds. On my other project, we have finally wrapped up our response to Council's request for further information and have submitted a very comprehensive submission back to them. So now we wait to see what they say. I think we're in for an interesting year in the property market, as there are a number of factors in play that will impact the sector. The federal election is due this year, and that always creates uncertainty in the market in the weeks before and after. The Banking Royal Commission has also wrapped up, and I think from a mortgage perspective, the banks got off pretty lightly. And I expect to see them relaxing their mortgage assessments ever so slightly. But more importantly, the banking industry can get on with changing and focusing on providing funding to worthy applicants. Hopefully, as the year unfolds, we see some more confidence return to the market. Now, if this is the year you want to become a property developer, then be sure to drop me an email to learn more about the mentoring program that is available to help teach you how to successfully develop property. Email me, Justin at Property Developer Podcast, to find out more. Alright, on with the show. Today I'm speaking with Jennifer Macquarie from the Fountaindale Group. Jennifer has worked in residential property development for more than 25 years, after learning the business from her property developer father. She and her brother have expanded the family business and have so far completed more than 80 projects. Jennifer has tertiary qualifications in marketing and finance and is also a licensed real estate agent, heading up the group's sales team. She certainly has an interesting story to tell, and I'm sure you will pick up lots of gold nuggets from her experience so far. In this conversation, we cover the importance of discovering niche markets, what it's like working in a family business, women in property development, and why the structure of a project makes such a big impact on its success. Keep an ear out for a growing market that Jennifer and me both feel is underserviced. I started off by asking Jennifer what food she would eat until she was sick, and coming from a dairy farming background, I shouldn't have been surprised with her answer.
Cheese. Cheese and wine.
Is that two? Do they go together?
Yeah, they have to go together, I think.
Is there one that leads you to being sick?
Well, I don't know. I suppose I have teenagers, and I've definitely seen the alcohol make them sick recently. But otherwise, no. I try not to drink too much wine, but definitely cheese. If you have too much of the creamy stuff, can make you sick. But yeah, I think it would be pretty hard to turn myself off cheese. There's so many beautiful ones out there. But
have you got a particular favourite?
Oh gosh, I love all of them. I've got a very good goat cheese provider and farmer who lives right near us, so that's a favourite.
Oh, that's always nice. The low food miles. That's very environmentally conscientious of you.
Yep, and it's very fresh as well. So, but then again, I can have some very high food mile cheese and happily eat a French brie. It's all about balance.
Well, you've already touched on that you live in a rural area, and I think that you've grown up on a dairy farm or on a farm. Can you give us a bit of a background about who you are and how you got into property development?
Yeah, so we live, I've grown up in the area I'm still in, and family lived there for 6 generations. So it's been a very long time. So very welded to the local area. And it's a regional area south of Sydney, south of Wollongong, if people know that area. A little town called Jamberoo is where I grew up, and it started off, generations ago as a cedar growing area or cedar cutting, and then moved into a dairy farming area. It's very beautiful and right near the coast, and I grew up on the family dairy farm, and my father started slowly to get into property development. He was always interested in property, he's very entrepreneurial, and started trading a few rural properties. And then in the 70s, the economics of dairy farming changed and it became very challenging to make a living. So he found that he was making more money cutting off a concessional lot here and there and buying and selling rural properties. And he started to focus his activities more in that area. And then within the next 5 years, he'd sold out of the dairy farm and was doing that full time. So I kind of grew up with development, and it started with walking the paddocks with my father, and he'd always take us to new properties. And I remember always looking in real estate agents' windows whenever we travelled anywhere. He was always interested in what the opportunities were wherever we went. So yes, I was familiar with development from a very young age, and also just with running businesses, because being on a dairy farm, the business tends to be run from home, and I grew up very interested in that. I was always a smart kid who was quite good at numbers, and my dad would always give me the opportunity to sit next to him. And I remember from age about 10, I'd sit next to him every month and do the accounts with him, because it's not the part of the business he loved or was good at. He was a real entrepreneur, but he had to do the back end stuff himself. He didn't like it, but he recognised that I had an interest and capability, and it kept him company. And so he just let me sit there and write his checks out for him, and he'd go through all the invoices with me. And really, so from a very young age, I've been involved in business, and we worked really well together. So as I grew up, I began to, in my late teens and university years, I did some more work experience both in his business and in real estate firms that he connected me into. And so when I left uni, he wanted me to come straight into the family business. So that's where it all began. So once I was in the business, being a fairly small family business, he recognised my capabilities and interests, so he just gave me experience across any sector of the business that I wanted. So that's a wonderful opportunity, and the confidence he had in me was fantastic. And so even though my first degree was in marketing and finance, but he allowed me to get into project management and areas that you may not naturally get into without the relevant qualifications, or if it wasn't a family business, perhaps I wouldn't have been able to do that. But it just gave me the view across the whole business and experience in every aspect of it.
And so sorry to interrupt, and what kind of projects were they, were you doing, or the family business was doing at the time?
Yeah.
And what kind of stuff was your dad doing in the lead up to that? Was it land subdivision?
Yeah, he was doing a lot of, he was quite diverse in what he was doing. And I think that to some extent is a reflection of being in a rural area, that you can't necessarily specialise. You have to really put your hand into all sorts of things to have the volume of work that you need. So he was doing rural subdivisions, and he was doing did some light industrial subdivisions at one time. He actually owned and built nursing homes for a while. So he was, it was very diverse. And then we moved more into some unit developments. We did some quite large unit developments in Wollongong, because by then the business had moved into Wollongong, which is the largest regional city in the area. And so, it was very diverse in its so I guess there wasn't a particular focus other than, within a territory, he was prepared to look at anything that was going, and wherever the market and the cycles were, that's where he went.
Okay, and so what were you working on when you were pretty fresh out of uni or still at uni?
I was doing a lot of all the marketing for the projects, because that was my background, but I was then moved into a bit more of subdivision management, and subdivisions, but then I was given the opportunity to project manage an 8-story, 60-unit development, which I had to kind of get in some expertise to help me, because I certainly didn't have any expertise in building and structures and that kind of thing. But, I understood, project management's all about time management and budgets, really. So then you combine the expertise with consultants in the various areas that you need. So I think I had a natural ability in the budgeting and planning and time management side, but it was just the particular skills in construction and engineering and all of that side of it that definitely wasn't my area of expertise. But you just have good people to support you.
And what was that project?
It was called City Beach in Wollongong, and it was right next to the golf course and near the beach. And it was a Sydney Water owned property for many, many years, and they just want to sell it. So it was a really good opportunity, and one of the first multi-storey units in that area. So it went very well. But traditionally along the beachfront in Wollongong, and this probably happened in any town, they were luxury units being built. 3-bedroom luxury had been built in previous years. And because we had a rather large project, we decided to be innovative and do some smaller product. But, it really pushed the boundaries of the valuers and the finance people and the real estate agents, because they were used to the really good quality locations having high-end luxury units, and then the cheap stuff and the smaller stuff is in the worst locations. But by then, we had a lot of more professionals in town and young people who wanted a good location, but didn't need or didn't want a large property because they were, single or a couple. So we proposed to do a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units in those locations, and it was a little bit challenging to get through at the time, finance-wise, because the real estate agents and valuers are all saying, well, what's been done here in the past is 3-bedroom, just do what's worked before. Whereas I've always tended to look where the gaps in the market are and what's not being provided. And, my inclination is not to just deliver what everyone else is delivering because you're going head to head on the same thing. But when you're offering a new product in an area, there's often a market that's not satisfied.
And how did you determine that gap existed, Jennifer?
Well, I guess I was one of the typical or potential buyers, being a young professional myself, and mixed in those circles. And also the price of the 3-bedroom luxury units was really going up and beyond the reach of so many people. And I thought, well, people love the location. They're going to want to still buy there, but at a more affordable price point. It just made sense to me that the location was a no-brainer, and why not tap into certain markets that have or segments that have a lower budget but really still want that location and potentially have the opportunity as a professional to be increasing their income over time. And so that's where we went, and lo and behold, the smallest product was the first to sell because no one else was offering it. And the 3-bedroom units, which went head to head with every other developer in town, were slower to sell because people had more choice. And that really was a reinforcing lesson to me and ever since, we've always looked for those niche markets. And they can be, it can be a risky strategy in a way, because what if you get it wrong? But if you really, look into it and know your market well, you get it right.
And when you were saying you were doing the marketing, what does that actually mean you were doing?
Well, putting the marketing campaigns together, and working with advertising agencies to do marketing campaigns, television ads, and all of those things. At that time, I didn't have a real estate license. I do now. I was using local real estate agents to do the selling on all of our projects, but over time, depending on, I guess, where in the region that we were working, because there's 5 local government areas that we work within, and it's quite spread out. But once we had a much larger project where we based our office, I opened a project marketing office, got my real estate license, and was doing it, actually doing the selling as well. And I found that general real estate agents who sell houses, secondhand houses up and down the street or whatever, they don't necessarily have project marketing skills and expertise. Some do, some have that experience and specialise in that now, but at the time, and particularly in a regional area, you didn't have project marketing specialists who were, just real estate agents. So that's why I decided, I thought I could do it better myself, and I did.
And so what was the skill gap that you felt the existing agents who were selling the existing stock didn't have, that you were looking for in people who could sell off the plan?
Well, to some extent it was a conflict of interest in a way, because real estate agents are incentivised by commission. And if my marketing budget as a developer was sending people into their real estate office, at that time, in that moment, they have a choice to direct them to my project, make a sale and a commission that will be earned in 12, 18 months' time, or they can direct that person to the established unit down the street and get their commission in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, or whenever that sale is, completed and the transaction settles. So that was one of my concerns, is that conflict of interest, and was my marketing budget, which was sending people into their office, being then directed in the correct way. So I felt that if with a specialist project marketing office of my own, there was no conflict. All my salespeople could sell was my own product. But then, particularly with land subdivisions, when you're selling land off the plan, there is a lot of knowledge that you build up over time about, services and slope on land and house and land packages with builders and all of that kind of stuff, that if you're a specialist project marketer in land, it's a very different knowledge base than a real estate agent who's selling established homes. So you've got to be able to inform people and understand yourself about, the building process and how builders work with land, and what the impact of slope and geotech is, and the process of land subdivision and the time it takes, and all of that stuff that you've got to be able to convey in a understandable way to an uninitiated land buyer.
Yes, yep, that's true. Actually, we might come back to the project marketing side of things, because I think there's a lot to cover there. But could you just give us a bit of an overview of the projects that you've completed over the years?
Yeah, and it has changed over time, because, as we mentioned before, we started in rural subdivisions, and the planning framework has changed, and now rural subdivisions are quite out of favour and considered really not very good for the, environmentally as well, because they, take up a lot of rural land, and they're very car dependent, and so for various reasons they've gone out of favour in the planning sector, and so our business has had to shift with both our product with both demographics and what's permissible under the planning structures. So we're no longer doing rural subdivisions. I don't think many people are. And we moved kind of more into edge of town conventional development. We did a lot of that land subdivision for a long time. In one particular town where we have been based, we did a couple of thousand blocks and really doubled the size of that town. And just typical, what is now typically called sprawl subdivision, which is not necessarily looked at favourably. And we made that realisation ourselves that, just marching over hill with more blocks of land, standard conventional blocks, is really not the best planning outcome and certainly not the best environmental outcome. So for a while we started to look into more compact township type developments and more diverse small lot product. And so, like any business in any industry, we've evolved over time and become innovative in what we do. So we are still doing a lot of subdivisions, but I guess what's different about our business is we do a lot of joint ventures, and that's where our business is focused. And so a lot of landowners come to us and ask us to help them develop their land. They have the land asset that's maybe has been rezoned, but they're not developers, but they want to participate in the development profit rather than just selling for the base land value.
And so what do those projects look like? Are they townhouses, 100 townhouses, 50 townhouses?
It's mainly land subdivision because it's a farmer on the edge of town whose land has been rezoned, and we find that we don't do a lot of joint ventures with townhouses, although we do have one at the moment. Occasionally, someone comes along with one of those. But it tends to be a large land holding on the edge of town that has been a farm, often been in the family for a long period of time, and it's their major asset. And they sometimes go through the process of trying to sell, and they realise that what they're going to achieve financially out of just selling is not as attractive as staying in there. So, mainly subdivisions.
And how do they find you?
Word of mouth. And the farming community is a small and well-connected community, and also the fact that we used to be farmers as well, and my father still has a very good network there. So, they often just find us through word of mouth, start talking around, say, to people about what they might want to do, or have other families who've done the same thing. So, it's a lot about reputation and those rural connections.
And how do those conversations go, Jennifer?
Look,
what are the concerns they have? What questions are they interested in?
It's all about trust. They're putting their biggest, or most valuable family asset into our hands, and so a lot of it is about trust and reputation, and getting previous joint venture partners, putting them in touch with those people so that they can understand the process that they went through, and that they did well at it at the end of it, and it wasn't a difficult process. I mean, look, any development's difficult, but it's just about us guiding them through it, and the relationship that we have, because you form a very close relationship with these families over a few years going through that process, and so what we try to do is keep them involved and make them comfortable that they're going to be an equal part of the decision-making process. So people don't want you to take their asset and go away, and they're kind of blind to the process and then come back with a check at the end. You really need to be open and transparent and ensure that they're part of the development all the way through, and that your reporting's really good. And it's as much as it's our family working with their family, and that's a really good synergy. And I find that the fact that we're a family business is very attractive to people, and the fact that we're a farming family, they feel that connection and shared background and experience. But at the same time, you need to be very professional in the way that you conduct the development and the reporting to them, and respect them as even though they don't have development experience, they've got business experience, and there's often family members who come in, like who their children have married or whatever. They may have professional expertise in some field or other, and we take the approach that whoever comes to the table has got something to contribute. and it's very collaborative, and there's no adversarial nature to our joint ventures because it's just too hard. Development's hard enough as it is. It's all got to work collaboratively and respectfully.
So when you say it's a family business, who's still involved or who is involved?
So my father started his business way back in the 70s, and that's the one I became involved in. And then more recently, or when I say recently, it's probably not recent now, it's probably about 15 years, my brother became involved, and he's an engineer, although a mechanical engineer, not a civil, but he came in and took over mainly the planning and construction side of the business. But gradually, about 10 years ago, my father wound down his business, and my brother and I started our own development business. So that's where we are now. My father still comes in and contributes, and he's still got his networks and loves to do the front end side of things and make those initial contacts and connections, and his entrepreneurial skills are still very valued a couple of days a week. But my brother and I are running the business together now, and we've got a really complementary skill set. Me with the finance and the marketing and sales side, and my brother with his engineering and project management side. So we run the business together, and it's a real anyone who runs a family business will know this, that having that same culture as you grow up, we kind of almost know how each other thinks, and we work really well together, and you can make quick decisions and sit down and be quite frank and open with each other. And
I'm sure there's some very direct conversations around the table.
I have heard of many families who say there's no way I could work with my brother or my father or whatever, but you just have to. I guess we grew up being taught to be very respectful of each other, and we didn't ever fight that much, and that's carried on. So it works really well.
And speaking of your dad, what lessons do you reckon you learnt, the key lessons you learnt from him from a developing perspective that you've carried with you?
I've learnt some to carry on with, and some of his characteristics not to carry on with.
Yes, of course. Well, maybe you can touch on those as well.
Yeah. So he's one thing I've learnt from him is he's always had a very good social conscience, and he did a lot of work in local government. He was a councillor in Kiama Council for many years, and mayor as well. So he always had a philosophy, and this went way back in our family, being such long-term I guess locals in a very small community, is that you have to contribute to your community, and I think I learnt from him that as much as you put in, you get out. And all of the experience that he had volunteering, I suppose you call it, in local government as a councillor and a mayor, it gained him so much knowledge of the planning system and development. And so no matter, he gave so much of his time, but he gained a huge knowledge that then he's fed back into his business. So, and we've continued with that philosophy in that giving of your time and expertise is really important back into your community and into the development sector and not-for-profits, and you gain that back in various ways. He's always been very entrepreneurial and prepared to take the leading edge in markets, probably sometimes too far. He's a bit of a risk taker, which a lot of developers are. And my brother and I do temper that a little bit. I feel like sometimes I've got the reins on a runaway bull. and it's been a really good balance into our business to have kind of me there doing that, to say, whoa, Nelly, perhaps don't run too quickly down that route, because he has had as much, not as much. He's had a lot of success in testing new markets and taking risks and that. But there's also been the ones that haven't gone as well, or for whatever reason he's not structured it right financially or whatever. So he's taught me so much, and he's still teaching me a lot.
Okay, and then what about your brother brings the engineering side of things to the picture?
He does, and he's also learnt a lot from my father, particularly on the community collaboration side of things. And I think development can be quite challenging in that you're bringing change to a local community. There can be a lot of objection, and the more you can interact and interact with people and kind of talk them through that change, the better. But we've had some very confrontational objections to our projects, like any developer has, and you just have to calmly deal with that and listen to that, and be prepared to stand up in front of sometimes an aggressive small group of people who doesn't like what you're proposing. And that's a real skill that my brother has as well. He's developed that over time. And so it's a combination of his engineering and project management skills, and then that upfront planning, getting things through the planning system, through the council systems as well. So we do have other project managers, and the nuts and bolts of project management is the skills that you can easily buy in and the expertise you can buy in. But it's really that getting the projects through and negotiating and getting past the roadblocks in planning and design that my brother really adds value to the business.
And what about the name of the company, Fountaindale Group? Is there some significance to that?
Yes, the Fountaindale Creek ran through our family farm. So that's been, I guess, in the family for 6 generations as well, that name. So in our little town of Jamberoo. So we definitely drew from the family heritage there.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that you did a marketing and a finance degree. Do you think having that finance background is also quite beneficial in terms of structuring deals or doing feasibilities?
Absolutely. I mean, my brother does most of the feasibilities now, but it's really about, once you've got your finance structured right, that's a huge tick in the progress of your project. And if you don't get that right, it adds significant risk to the project, and it questions the viability altogether. So, yeah, I think that my MBA was in finance, and it's been a hugely valuable part of my skill set. And I think that that's getting even more challenging, and has become more challenging over time. And there's different scales of developers. You've got the big publicly listed development companies who fund get a lot of their capital through shareholder investment. They operate their finances and have a totally different way of or list of challenges, I suppose, than we do. But being a smaller regional and family-based company, capital is always constrained in that you need a lot of capital to run a development business, and we've learned over time to structure ours quite conservatively in that we either use the asset of the joint venture partner. So a farmer might have had a rezoning and they bring their land asset into the project without debt. That's a huge step up in the first place, to be able to have the land asset unencumbered, and then you can relatively easily borrow against that for borrow the construction costs, assuming you've got the pre-sales to back that up. Another way we bring capital in is sometimes the landowner doesn't want to stay in the development. We've got some investors that follow us around, and they bring their capital in and replace the landowner and buy the land, and then we go forward as usual with the new landowner as our joint venture partner. So it's really important to us to keep that initial debt down or at zero, and then once you've got a DA, development consent, it's much easier to borrow for the development costs. And we've learned that over time, because we've had projects over time where we borrowed much more to buy land, and then had to borrow construction costs as well. And then you hit, it's fine when times are good, but then you hit something like the GFC, which we learned a lot out of, and a lot of developers didn't survive that. And, that's where a poorly structured or over-geared project can pull the rug out from under you.
And so have you had to go for any finance or had any discussions with lenders in the last couple of months? Because I know things have tightened up a bit in the credit market. Don't know whether you've had any experience or advice for developers listening out there.
I'm actually just about to settle a loan on Monday next week. So a loan that we've had to put together over the last few months. So fortunately, in that case, we had that same circumstance where the land is debt free, and we're about to go into construction, and so we had to get a construction loan. It's further down the coast in a coastal town called Mollymook, and we find that certain lenders won't go out of metro areas. So, and immediately where there's less opportunity for us to, or a smaller pool of lenders that we can draw from. So that's, I guess, an initial challenge that metro developers don't face, is that, we've got a smaller pool to draw from. And then sometimes the valuers that value the site have concerns about regional areas, but fortunately in this case we're using the lender's using a regional valuer. We had enough pre-sales to cover the debt. That's another tick on the lender's side. As long as you've covered their exposure 100% with pre-sales, you're right. And fortunately we got those last year before the market really tightened up, and so we had that risk covered. So on this occasion, it seems okay. We've got the loan that we need to, but I know that there's a lot of projects out there that are having difficulty. I do have another small townhouse project that we've just put on ice for now because finance for that one is going to be more challenging. So you've really just got to, I guess, adapt to the current circumstance where you can.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask if you'd noticed the market softening, which seems that you have, and what are you doing in response?
Well, it's softening. It has softened, definitely. The coastal one I was talking about, perhaps not quite as much there, because it's in a market where there hasn't been land offered for a while, and it's not that far from the beach. So it's certainly slowed, but it's not stopped completely. Whereas the other small one I just mentioned, the 15 townhouse development, it's more in a suburban area, and there's a lot of others out there, and that's definitely constrained. And so that project we've got a DA, but it hasn't started, so construction hasn't started, so we're in a position where we can just press pause on that one for now. And in these kind of markets, you just have to be able to make those decisions, and not always an easy decision, because we've got a joint venture partner who's who really wanted to get that project going and get their capital out of it. But we've just had to advise them, look, for now it's not going to. It could do more damage to start it than to just pause it at the moment. So, yeah, that's the only project that is really vulnerable to the market at the moment that I've got. Fortunately, I'm really glad I'm not in a position where I've got a project under construction that really needs sales to keep it going. And that's probably more good luck than good management, because you often don't know. You can't predict the timing of your project, particularly while there's a planning process to go through, and that can take longer than you expected, and you may tip yourself out into a different part of the cycle than you thought you would be in.
Yes, I understand exactly what you mean of facing that issue at the moment. I've had a project going through planning that we thought would be well through construction, approaching completion now, but because of a delay in planning, it's pushed everything out, and then the market has changed in that time.
Yep.
So, yes, it's hard to get it exactly right.
Yeah. So the other thing I'm doing now that I wasn't doing a year or so ago with my projects is I'm actually spending more on marketing. I haven't had to do that a lot in the last few years. Projects I wouldn't say sell themselves, but I didn't have to spend as much or put as much effort and creativity into marketing. But suddenly I'm doing that for that coastal project. I'm doing a television commercial, and so which is kind of, I'm pulling out all my old marketing skills.
Yes, I was thinking that. Talk us through what the kind of activities that you're doing. I'm very interested to hear.
So I do a lot of online marketing. So each project has its own website and Facebook profile or Facebook page, and I just find Facebook is the most effective marketing, cost effective, and generates the greatest volume of responses. And I don't know whether that's because I'm working in defined regional areas, that you can spend a lot less on Facebook than on, say, print media.
And so, sorry, are you running those campaigns or do you outsource that?
No, I run them.
Okay.
I've had to teach myself about social media, and I probably still have a lot more to learn, but I kind of teach myself as I go. So yeah, we're running them in house, and because it actually comes to my phone, I've got another admin not there, but I can see all the time what's coming through, and social media is always a double-edged sword as well, because for this one down the coast, we've had the Facebook page there and a lot of positive response, but as soon as we got in there and started clearing the land, neighbours get on the site and write negative things, and you're just exposed to that as well, so you have to be quite responsive in being able to manage and monitor comments on there.
So and how do you respond to that when you get that negativity?
Well, sometimes you just have to hide the comments and not respond, because you get into an argument, and that's never winnable, because someone who's grieving over trees being cut down behind them, you're never going to be able to satisfy them. And other people can get in there and say, well, that's just progress, or there were once trees on the block that you live on now, and that was once a rural area. But none of those arguments really are very effective for someone who just hates seeing trees cut down around them. So sometimes it's best just to block the comment and not respond, and otherwise you end up with a bit of a storm on your social media page.
And I think we'd had a previous discussion that you tend to target female users on Facebook. Is that correct?
Yeah. I find that, and I've learnt this over time and through practice, that women are far more responsive on Facebook than men, or far more active. And you can pick your target audience, and I would do that by location and age or whatever else, but and just not be specific on gender. But then over time I gradually found that women are more interactive and would comment more on Facebook. And just my general knowledge also and experience in real estate is that women often make the final decision, or maybe they make the initial decision about what to look at, but they also often make the final decision after a couple has looked at various options. So yeah, I find my spend is more effective if I cut the blokes out completely.
I'm not going to make any comment on that comment, Jennifer.
Because the women then are more interactive and talk about it. Then they'll talk to their partner, and that's how their partner finds out about it. But I think that it's well known that women tend to be a greater proportion of Facebook users. So
yes, I do agree. I do think, generally speaking, that females play a very important role in the decision-making process, particularly when it comes to larger purchases, but particularly a property. I think if there's a male and female involved in the decision-making, I do think more often than not it's the woman that has the final say on whether that goes ahead.
Yeah, and the man might be the one who's asking all the questions or whatever, but and kind of, if you take that at face value, you might think he's making the decision, but in the end, you're right, it's her.
Yes, I'm sure my wife lets me think that I'm making the decisions most of the time. I think we'd had another conversation where you had mentioned, had you developed a product aimed for women who are coming out of relationships, or there was a particular type of product that you'd developed over time, or that you saw a gap in the market and you produced something for it? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And as I mentioned before, we do a lot of greenfield subdivisions, and that product tends to be a certain size lot and family homes on there. But then traditionally units and smaller product has been in more town centre and urban areas and cities. But I was finding that, in our new development areas, that there is a lot of women, particularly single older women who are coming out of divorce, who, don't want to live a long way from their children and grandchildren. And we had a new project that we were developing called Talumbar Village that we were able to, with the help of council, get a particular DCP or development control plan approved that enabled a lot more diverse range of lot sizes down to 250 square metre lots. And we had our own design controls on there. And so even on some of those smaller lots, we would put a home at the front and a garage at the back off a rear lane, a triple garage. The double garage belongs to the house at the front. The single garage next to it belongs to the apartment that sits on top across the three garages. And so it was effectively a duplex on each of those sites, but one big home and one apartment out the back. And those little apartments sold all day long. They were my most popular product in a greenfield subdivision. Once again, because everyone else around me, every other developer, is doing standard lots and standard house and land packages, and here I had a small, affordable new product in amongst that, and selling mainly to single older women, but also appealing to first home buyers, because as affordability became more and more of an issue, they couldn't afford to step straight into a 3 or 4 bedroom home, and these little apartments suited them as well. A young professional couple or a working couple didn't have kids. It was quite okay for them to step into a very small new product because they're out all day and working, and they come home and they don't really want to be looking after a larger property. Or, perhaps they would if they had the money to do it. They would still prefer to buy a larger one, but this was a very acceptable and popular way for them to get into the market. But particularly for those divorced older women, they've come from, when I say older, I'm not talking really old, I'm talking, the kid empty nester age. Perhaps the kids have left home and the relationship's split, and they've had a reasonably good middle class kind of standard of life living, and but suddenly get to this position where their family asset is split, and both of those people out of that relationship have to buy their own home, and they have this woman perhaps may not have had a long-term professional career and doesn't, at that end of her working life, doesn't have borrowing capacity, and suddenly finds herself in a very difficult position of always owning her own home, and suddenly, well, can she afford one at all, and will she be renting for the rest of her life? And it's a really challenging circumstance that women are often finding themselves in. And so they'd come to our office and say, what have you got? Because greenfields areas tend to be more affordable, but then they didn't have small product for them. And to come to us and discover that there was this lovely, bright, small one-bedroom unit available, and it wasn't something horrible and old. It was fresh and new, and it was exactly the size that would suit them. And, I've had women crying on my shoulder in my office in relief that there is something for them that is not, that it's kind of, the quality is of the standard they're used to, it's just a lot smaller. And so that, I've really, having seen that challenge that people are going through, it's just driven me to want to produce more of that. And it's not easy to do. We were able to do it in that one project because we had we wrote the DCP with the support of council, and they adopted it. And it was quite different. We didn't have floor space ratios, which is quite unusual. We had, footprints and height limits, but we didn't have floor space ratios, which meant on a small block we could do a home and an apartment and go beyond what the average floor space ratio for the area was. And we had rear lanes, and in New South Wales at least, there's not a lot of projects with rear lanes. So we were able to put those in. And so the urban design is very important, and then the DCP requirements are very important to enable you to do those things. But in most council areas, you can't do it. So part of my role, I'm quite active in the Property Council and industry groups like that. They're really trying to ask councils or push councils to focus on affordable housing and the provision of more diverse housing choices. But to do that, they need to change their DCPs. And, I think as a society, we need to recognise the challenges people go through and enable housing to be provided for their needs. And there's a big gap there, and we're not doing it yet.
And so do you think, you had a project team that was doing the selling. Were you doing that, or do you have a team?
Yeah, we have a small team, but for me, I make sure that I'm in the sales office at least one day a week. I really find that valuable as a developer to keep in touch with changes in the market, where price points are changing, where demographics are changing, and it just enables me to make decisions about what I'm developing in a very timely manner. And if you think about that as me as a decision maker talking to the market every week, right, directly to people, not being filtered or not having to make my decisions based on statistics and demographics that are fed up to me by whoever, compared to a really big developer who might have 6 layers between the decision maker and the people coming into the sales office. I think that it enables us to be extremely responsive to market changes in the way we develop our product, but also the way we're marketing and communicating with those people as well.
Okay, and then circling back to the marketing activities that you're doing in this changing market, so Facebook, TV commercials, you get an external agency to do the commercials, or are you rolling around with your iPhone and...
No, I haven't got into that yet. I certainly don't have the expertise there. So I've got a good advertising agency that puts the TV commercials together. But it's interesting to see how that has changed over time as well. Because I remember years ago, or 15 years ago, doing a TV commercial and having, the talent come in and the families, who, the actors or whatever. And it was a big production, and it was very costly to produce a really good television ad. Luckily, I was in a regional market, so regional media is cheaper. So often Sydney developers can't afford Sydney television, but in regional areas, the airtime is cheaper. So that made it easy or more affordable. But now a television commercial can be put together very cost effectively. I think this one only cost me about $10,000 in production, compared to, could have been closer to 100,000 once years ago. So a lot of it's, what are they called, stock footage.
Yep.
You can send a drone up and get some footage through that way and pull it all together. It looks fantastic, but it's much more cost effective to produce now.
And what are the other? Well, yeah, you can basically, with your iPhone these days or your smartphone, you can produce broadcast quality commercials that would have cost $100,000 15, 20 years ago. It's pretty amazing.
That's right. Yeah, it's really good and accessible. And I guess with the internet and Facebook and those kind of media avenues, you no longer have to necessarily buy primetime television, which is very expensive. You can use those other avenues to run your video.
And what other marketing tactics are you employing?
Well, on our subdivisions, we always use the project home builders as an avenue. And so keeping those relationships going is really important, because they're a great source of referral. But yeah, it's mainly social media and a little bit of press advertising, but not a lot. That's kind of fading out. And then obviously the online listings as well. Although I find that the real estate platforms, realestate.com and those kind of platforms I know a lot of developers spend money highlighting and promoting their projects through that source, and it is very effective, but it's becoming very expensive.
Yes, it is.
So that's why I'm erring towards Facebook and social media.
Yeah, well, I don't know what it's like where you are, but in Melbourne, you're looking, depending on which suburb you're in, you're talking thousands of dollars for an online listing.
Yes.
Which is sort of getting into the realms of the absurd, particularly in a slowing market where it becomes more obvious the costs that you're outlaying.
Yeah. And when you think if you can spend $1,000 on social media, as long as you've got your targeting right, you can get huge coverage.
Yes, well, we're doing that at the moment with our a campaign that we're running, and yeah, you do get really good reach.
Yeah.
And you've touched on the female market, and I was curious about your views on women or females in the property development sector, because I don't. There's not as many as there are males, and I wondered if you had a view on that.
I definitely do, because as part of my role in the Property Council, I've been running a Women in Property series in my region, and that's a series of seminars and events that give female developers and not just developers, because as you say, there's not a lot of them, but professionals who work in the development industry, to give them an opportunity to get some profile and be part of speaking panels, etc. And I find that in the professional sphere of architects, planners, that kind of thing, and even engineers now, there's been a big growth in the number of women operating in those areas, which has been fantastic, and project managers as well. But when I consider my definition of what a property developer is, it's the person that's out there taking financial risk around a project, and putting their personal assets and guarantees on the line. And there's not a huge number of those leading larger property development organisations. I think that there is a lot of that hidden in small firms, and they may have been, a carpenter who's become a builder who's now doing townhouse developments, and their wife is in there with them 100%, risking their family assets and probably doing a lot of the backroom stuff. I call that woman a property developer because she's contributing hugely to the project and risking their finances. So they often are there, but they're not the public profile of that development. It's often the husband who's doing that. So I think they're out there, but possibly not in the larger firms where people have more profile. So that's definitely still more male dominated. But I've got to say, I've found being a female developer, it's a competitive advantage for our business. And it's all about that, I guess, the perception, and everyone who's in the development sector knows what that stereotypical developer profile is, and it's exacerbated by the media. And I don't think it's necessarily real. There's certainly been a few aggressive and dominant and dodgy developers out there, but that's not the bulk of them, but that's what the media focuses on. So for people who are not experienced in development, the people I deal with who are coming in without any experience but are considering allowing us to joint venture with them and work on their land, they may have that concern that they want to make sure that they're getting involved with someone that they can trust. And having me there as a female and having more of a kind of, I guess, perhaps a softer approach and a more collaborative approach, it makes them relax significantly. So I think it's been a big advantage to us to be able to have me as the director and key driver of the project for the comfort of the people, the landowners and investors that are joint venturing with us. So I think a lot of developers could perhaps take that on board and realise that women bring a very different flavour to the business and different skill set, different style and culture that can really meld well with the male side of the business and together make the whole thing stronger.
Yeah, I definitely think you need a balance of the male and the female input. I believe you do get better results that way.
Yeah, you do.
It's interesting because I got an email not that long ago from a young female listener who said she was really interested in getting into property development, but she was concerned that she wouldn't be taken seriously, and if she was on site, builders or tradies or whoever it was, or the people that she was dealing with would treat her differently because she was a female. Mm-hmm. And I wrote back to her and said I wasn't sure that would be the reality. I think it depends what you allow to happen. And certainly the people that I deal with are quite professional, and I think if I came across people that were behaving that way, I just wouldn't use them.
Yeah, I
There's a
agree.
case of screening the people on your team.
Yep, yep, totally agree. And I think that, there's been a lot of social research on women in business generally that we tend to undervalue our skills and capability and how people perceive us. And so often we're holding ourselves back. And so I just say go for it. There's definitely, I'm sure there's all types of tradies out there that, and some good ones and some not so respectful ones, and sometimes you'll come across the ones that are more challenging to deal with or not respectful, and you need to move on from them. But there's some wonderful builders out there who've always been respectful of me, and I've not really had that issue. So you just have to get out there and put yourself out there and do it, and know that you'll encounter some fantastic professionals in the building sector and some not so, and
Well,
deal with
I've
it.
had that as well, Jennifer. I don't think
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
not.
it's only for women. I've certainly had to deal with some interesting people.
Yeah, that's right. And so, to that woman who wrote you that email, I just would say, get out there, start small, and just watch and learn. And some male tradies are very happy to explain everything to you, and you know, you just have to take that opportunity and go for it.
Yeah, well, there's certainly no special skill that only men have for you to be a property developer. There's no reason why women can't do it, or that more women shouldn't get involved. I think it would be great to see more females out there getting into the property development game.
That's right. And that thing that we talked about before, that women tend to be making the decisions about purchasing property. So therefore, as a woman developer, you would think that there's an advantage there in having that female perspective in working out what you're designing and planning for women to make a decision about. So just for all the women out there contemplating getting into development, recognise what you have that perhaps may be even an advantage over male developers. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of advantages that you bring.
I think there's a massive niche opportunity for female buyers that are, as you say, coming out of relationships at whatever age, but particularly perhaps a sort of a slightly older demographic that are, as you have experienced, are a bit fearful, have probably doing something on their own and making a big decision. I think if they're dealing with someone who understood that, I think they would feel more comfortable dealing with women in that process.
Yep, you're absolutely right. That's what I've experienced.
Oh, very good. Well, what do you think you've learned about yourself along the way, Jennifer?
Self-analysis, that's always interesting, isn't it? I don't know. I've been in the industry a very long time, and anyone grows and changes over time and as they gain experience. But I guess you do learn about yourself. I've recognised that I'm not someone who sticks to convention, and I guess that I've recognised that in my father as well. So maybe it's a family trait, but that can feed opportunity and risk. I'm prepared to step outside my comfort zone, and even things like as a young person, I might not have been as comfortable public speaking or being out there, putting myself out there, but I would push myself and do that, thinking, well, I'll just fake it till I make it. And sometimes you fail at that or don't feel you've done particularly well. But then, the more you do that, the better you get at it. So I'm someone who pushes myself and is prepared to take a bit of a risk, which I think is important in property development.
Yes, I think you do have to keep pushing yourself.
Yeah. And I think that probably goes back to that the question that we last had about that young woman who's considering getting into the market. Just push yourself.
And what do you reckon the most difficult decision you've had to make is, business-wise?
That's definitely, those difficult decisions are definitely made around challenging times in the market and the cycle. And the worst period we went through as a business was the GFC, and I think it's gone down in history in the property development circles. A lot of people didn't survive, and what do you have to do to survive in that circumstance? You have to pull the pin on projects. You have to pull back your overheads, and you have to put staff off. And that was the hardest for me, is to finally make the decision that I couldn't carry the overheads I was carrying. The projects were being put on ice, and I had to put staff off. And for a family business who had staff that had worked with us for quite some time, they feel like family. That was definitely the hardest for me. But if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here today, potentially. So, and that's the same for any business. And I know that banks went through that process. They had to put people off. Hundreds of people lost their jobs in that period. So, yeah, I think for our size business and the fact that it's family business, it feels very personal. And fortunately, those people have, we've still got good relationships with those people, and they've gone on to do great things. But yeah, I would say that was the most challenging thing for me, to have to sit down with people and do that at that point in time. But what I've learned from it is the way that I structure the business and keep our overheads low and keep our financial risk lower. And that's and nowhere near this particular cyclical period we're going through now is nowhere near as bad as it was then. But I think that I am reaping the rewards of those lessons that I learned in the way I've structured the business, in that we're much more robust now going through this particular squeeze point in the cycle than we would have been had I not learnt those lessons previously.
And I wanted to ask about how you continue to learn, and are there things you do for inspiration, or where you're looking for ideas?
Yeah, I'm always learning, and not just for the benefit of the business, because I just love I enjoy it. I like to learn what's out there and happening, not just in my home territory, but out in the wider world, to see what innovations are happening in the market. And particularly, I'm a bit of a social watcher, as in demographic and social changes. I like to keep at the forefront of those and read demographers and interesting things on that, because it always ends up feeding back into what product that I'm going to be developing over time, and anything about how people live and how societies work and how communities work, and the interaction between populations and particularly small towns, because that's where we work. How much the population in a small town that needs to drive the commercial component, and all of that stuff I'm always very interested in. And so I find that the internet is a wonderful thing, and every bit of information you want is out there. And I watch very little commercial television, and I don't have a lot of time to read so many books, but I see a lot of stuff on the internet, and you can tailor what you receive through your newsfeed or what you subscribe to. You can tailor it quite well, and you can get a lot of learning out, and it's free. It's wonderful, and you can just access it at the time that you need, or the time you've got available. So that's what I do. I find a lot of interesting stuff out there. But I'm also, as I mentioned before, it's always been a big thing in the culture of our family to give time back and contribute skills. So I've just come off 6 years as a board member of not-for-profit community housing provider. And while I was donating my time, or giving my time to that, and so it seems like I'm kind of giving more than receiving, what I found from that is I learnt so much from the other board members I was working with, who came from a diverse range of backgrounds and had different skill sets to me. And that was so important to me, because I work in a very small business with a very small team. And so it's what I was lacking, I had to find from outside, which is that interaction with a broader professional team in management. And I found that by donating my time. So that philosophy of you get back as much as you give was definitely proven to me in that circumstance. And I learned so much also about the need of in social and affordable housing, and the creative ways that not-for-profits are trying to address that need, and the challenges that they have, and the government funding that's no longer being provided. And there's now a lot of opportunity, and the government's encouraging this, for collaboration between community housing providers and private developers. And so, once again, all that time I put into the community housing sector as a volunteer director. I'm no longer on that board, but I can, if I want to now, I can take the business in the direction of collaborating with those kind of organisations as a developer. So, yeah, I'm constantly learning and looking for new opportunities and seeing how things are changing.
Well, then looking back, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself, when would it be, and what would you say to Jennifer?
I think it would be early in my career, and this advice probably applies to anybody stepping into their professional career, and particularly young women, just to back yourself and to have more confidence in who you are and what you bring. I think at the time I was probably more, I listened a lot to what people older and more experienced, and particularly men, because it was a male-dominated industry, and it still is to some extent. But sometimes I would think I should go in a particular direction, or a decision should be made in a particular way, and then people would talk me out of it. And because they were more experienced, I would end up deferring to them. But in hindsight, my decision would have been better. So you've got to kind of know when to draw on the experience of others, and when to think, well, actually, no, despite their experience, the direction I want to go is actually the correct one. And so not to be talked out of things where your gut is telling you to go one way, because we tend to, as a young person, tend to be less confident in our own capabilities. Well, I was anyway. So I would tell myself to stand up and follow my gut a bit more, I think, way back then.
And so what would you say is your top tip for other developers out there who are looking to take their business to the next level?
So I would say concentrate on, or focus on, the niche markets where you can have perhaps a market there that others aren't addressing, and particularly keep an eye on the edge of social change and what opportunities that might bring, because you don't really want to be going always head to head with everybody else in the same pool and the same market. So that's my key recommendation. And then focus on your project's financial structure, because it's such a big part of risk management for your business. And once you get that right, you can just kind of concentrate on the project itself. But yeah, that financial structure is very important.
And when you're talking about financial structure, what does that mean, or what does that look like?
It's, I think, not making it too loan heavy. Just keep your equity up as much as you can, and that's always that can be a challenge. But I suppose you manage that by not taking on too many projects at the same time, if that's how you need to, to reduce your loans. But it's just that the market can turn the example that you gave is where your planning takes longer than expected, and suddenly you're in a different market and a different. The banks have got a different perspective on lending, and we've seen that in the last 6 months while the Banking Royal Commission's been on. And banks changed their views on lending very, very quickly, and suddenly projects that may have been financed weren't able to be financed. And you're going to be less vulnerable to that if you've got a more conservatively geared project.
Okay, that's definitely good advice.
Mm.
All right, well, if people want to find out more about you or about the Fountaindale Group, where can they go?
They can look on our website, which is fountaindale.net.au. I'm also on LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect. Find out a little more about me there.
Oh, very good. Well, Jennifer Macquarie, I'm really grateful to you for sharing your insights with us on the Property Developer Podcast.
No worries. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, thank you. And we'll speak to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Justin.
See you, Jennifer.
Bye.
Okay, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Jennifer. I certainly did. Here's a couple of things I took away from our conversation. 1. Understand the gap in the market that your stock is going to fill. Jennifer explained how she is always looking at producing stock that fills a hole in the market. For example, smaller units that may suit regional women coming out of a relationship. If you can find these niches, you should enjoy more success in selling your products, and it may help your business to grow and evolve. So keep your eyes and ears open for market feedback about gaps in what is being offered. 2. Boost your marketing budget when the market softens. Having a marketing background has helped Jennifer evolve and adapt to different market conditions. And with the current softening of the markets, she has ramped up her marketing budget. Jennifer mentioned that she is doing a lot of Facebook marketing and finding that females respond far better to her campaigns. So it may be worthwhile bumping up your marketing spend, but being more targeted in how you approach your audience. 3. Be careful about over-leveraging. Jennifer shared her experience of scraping through the GFC and having to let staff go, and how many developers who over-leveraged got caught out. It taught her a lesson to be conservative with the gearing on their projects, and she feels this has served them well. Jennifer also touched on the importance of getting your financial structure right and how much that can help the success of the project. Partnering with landowners has been another way that Jennifer has helped with de-risking projects and keeping the gearing low. So perhaps you could try something similar. Okay, if you enjoyed that chat with Jennifer, then you may enjoy my chat with my old mentor, Troy Harris, in episode 45. Troy and me discuss many things about developing, including some of the myths about being a developer.
It's funny, a lot of people will say when the market's hot, oh, gee, must be a great time to be a developer. It's actually the opposite, because while the prices might be moving up on what you're selling, they're moving up extraordinarily on what you're buying.
I'm sure you will enjoy Troy's story of going from toy shop owner to successful developer, so jump back to episode 45 for a listen. Alright, that's just about it for this episode. Remember to drop a comment in iTunes if you're enjoying the show. If you're feeling fired up and want to take action on learning how to develop property, then email me, Justin, at propertydeveloperpodcast.com to find out more about the Property Developing Mentoring Program. You can also catch me on Facebook and Instagram for my latest pics, videos and developing news. I've just added the video walkthrough of my current site, so take a look at that. And for all the past episodes of the show, head to www.propertydeveloperpodcast.com. So, until next time, may you find a way to capture the attention of a niche audience.
You've been listening to the Property Developer Podcast. Tune in next time for more tips, ideas and inspiration to take your developing to the next level. For more developing love, make sure to visit propertydeveloperpodcast.com.